I stood in the back of St. Augustine Cathedral watching my sister Melissa deliver what she thought was a private humiliation disguised as a maid of honor speech. Her voice carried perfectly across the reception hall as she gestured toward me. With champagne-fueled confidence, telling 300 guests how pathetic it was that her older sister, at 34, still lived alone in a tiny apartment while working endless hours at some boring tech company that nobody had ever heard of. The laughter that rippled through the crowd felt like glass breaking against my skin, but I remained perfectly still, my phone buzzing insistently in my clutch with notifications I had been expecting for weeks. What Melissa didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 12 hours earlier, federal judge Patricia Morrison had signed the final approval for the largest whistleblower settlement in pharmaceutical history, and tomorrow morning the wire transfer of $90 million would hit my previously modest bank account. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The irony of my situation had been building for 3 years. Though the foundation was laid much earlier during what I now recognize as the most significant professional decision of my career. In 2019, I had accepted a position as senior data analyst at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, a mid-tier company specializing in respiratory medications that had recently relocated their headquarters to Austin, Texas. The job offer represented everything I had worked toward since completing my master's degree in biostatistics at Rice University: competitive salary, comprehensive benefits, and most importantly, the opportunity to work on clinical trial data that could genuinely improve patient outcomes for asthma and COPD sufferers. My family, particularly Melissa, had never understood my career trajectory. While she pursued what she considered more glamorous work in fashion marketing, moving from New York to Los Angeles to chase increasingly ambitious social media campaigns, I had methodically built expertise in pharmaceutical data analysis. My work involved examining clinical trial results, identifying statistical anomalies, and ensuring that medication efficacy claims were supported by rigorous scientific evidence. It was meticulous, unglamorous work that required patience and attention to detail, qualities that Melissa frequently dismissed as boring perfectionism during our increasingly infrequent family gatherings. The contrast between our chosen paths had created tension that extended beyond typical sibling rivalry. Melissa's career in fashion marketing provided constant content for her Instagram presence, where she documented lavish industry events, designer collaborations, and international travel. Her life appeared glamorous and spontaneous, filled with beautiful people and expensive experiences that translated perfectly into social media engagement. My work, by comparison, involved spending long hours reviewing statistical models and regulatory compliance documentation, activities that produced no visually appealing content and generated limited conversational interest at family dinners. This fundamental difference in our professional approaches had created a dynamic where Melissa positioned herself as the successful, socially connected sister while characterizing me as the antisocial workaholic who prioritized spreadsheets over relationships. Our parents, Dr. Richard and Patricia Hartwell, both retired university professors who had dedicated their careers to academic research, understood the value of my work intellectually but seemed perpetually concerned about my social isolation. They frequently suggested I should follow Melissa's example in cultivating a more visible and socially active lifestyle. The family dynamic had intensified when Melissa announced her engagement to Marcus Webb, a successful commercial real estate developer she had met at a charity gala in Beverly Hills. Marcus represented everything my family valued in terms of social success: charming, financially secure, and connected to influential networks in entertainment and business. Their engagement had been a year-long celebration of elaborate events, each more photogenic than the last, culminating in the destination wedding weekend that had brought us all to Napa Valley for what Melissa described as the social event of the season. Throughout the engagement period, family conversations increasingly centered around Melissa's wedding planning and my apparent failure to secure similar social and romantic success. During Sunday phone calls with our mother, I endured regular commentary about my single status, my modest apartment in East Austin, and my tendency to work weekends instead of attending social gatherings. The suggestions became more pointed as the wedding approached, with explicit recommendations that I use the wedding weekend as an opportunity to network with Marcus's accomplished friends, several of whom would apparently be excellent matches for someone with my educational background if I could just learn to be more socially engaging. What my family didn't understand, what I had been legally prohibited from discussing for nearly 2 years, was that my unremarkable position at Meridian Pharmaceuticals had placed me at the center of the largest pharmaceutical fraud case in recent history. The discovery had begun with routine data analysis that revealed statistical inconsistencies in clinical trial results for Respiron, Meridian's flagship asthma medication that generated over $400 million in annual revenue for the company. The initial anomalies were subtle, the kind of data irregularities that might be dismissed as clerical errors or acceptable variations in patient response patterns. However, my training in biostatistics had taught me to examine outliers carefully, particularly when they appeared in patterns that suggested systematic rather than random occurrence. Over several weeks of detailed analysis, I had identified multiple instances where patient outcome data had been modified to support efficacy claims that the original trial results did not substantiate. The modifications were sophisticated, designed to pass casual regulatory review while significantly overstating the medication's effectiveness in treating severe asthma symptoms. More troubling, the altered data concealed evidence of serious side effects that had occurred during clinical trials, including cardiac complications that could be life-threatening for patients with certain pre-existing conditions. The systematic nature of these modifications indicated deliberate manipulation rather than accidental data entry errors. My initial response had been to document the anomalies carefully and report them through Meridian's internal compliance channels, following established protocols for addressing data integrity concerns. I had prepared a comprehensive analysis showing the statistical impossibility of the reported outcomes given the patient demographics and trial conditions, along with specific examples of modified entries that could be traced through the database. Revision history. The response from Meridian's compliance department had been swift and concerning. Within 48 hours of submitting my report, I was called into a meeting with Dr. Amanda Foster, the Vice President of Clinical Research, and 2 executives from the legal department whose presence suggested the company viewed my findings as a significant threat rather than a valuable quality control discovery. Dr. Foster's approach during that meeting had been a careful balance of professional courtesy and implicit intimidation. She acknowledged the thoroughness of my analysis while suggesting that my interpretation of the data variations reflected inexperience with the complexities of multi-site clinical trials. The legal representatives emphasized the proprietary nature of clinical trial data and the serious consequences that could result from inappropriate disclosure of confidential research information to external parties. The meeting concluded with what was presented as a promotion opportunity. I would be transferred to a new position in the Regulatory Affairs Department with increased salary and expanded responsibilities for preparing FDA submission documents. The role would provide valuable career advancement while removing me from direct access to the clinical trial databases where I had identified the concerning patterns. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The offer was clearly designed to silence my concerns through a combination of professional advancement and restricted access to problematic data. However, my academic training had taught me to prioritize scientific integrity over personal career advancement, and the implications of allowing manipulated safety data to influence patient treatment decisions created an ethical obligation that transcended employment considerations. Instead of accepting the transfer, I had quietly begun documenting additional evidence of data manipulation while researching legal protections available to pharmaceutical industry whistleblowers. The process required extreme discretion, as my continued access to company databases depended on maintaining the appearance of normal work responsibilities while systematically building a comprehensive case. Over the following months, I had worked with extraordinary care to preserve evidence of data manipulation across multiple clinical trials, not just for Respiron but for 3 other Meridian medications that showed similar patterns of statistical anomalies. The scope of the manipulation was far broader than I had initially recognized, suggesting a systematic company-wide approach to enhancing clinical trial outcomes through data modification. The documentation process had been methodical and exhausting, requiring me to work additional hours beyond my regular responsibilities to avoid detection while building an irrefutable case. I had created encrypted backups of original trial data, detailed analyses showing the statistical impossibility of reported outcomes, and timeline documentation that correlated data modifications with key regulatory submission deadlines. During this period, my family had become increasingly critical of my work schedule and social isolation, unaware that my evening and weekend hours were dedicated to protecting potentially thousands of patients from dangerous medications with manipulated safety profiles. Melissa's frequent complaints about my unavailability for family events and social gatherings carried particular irony, as I was risking my career and personal safety to address fraud that could have life-threatening consequences for vulnerable patients. The decision to contact federal authorities had been carefully researched and strategically timed. I had consulted with David Richardson, a whistleblower attorney specializing in pharmaceutical cases, who had explained the legal protections available under the False Claims Act and the typical timeline for federal investigations. The process would likely require several years of cooperation with federal investigators and potentially include testimony in criminal proceedings against company executives. Richardson had also explained the potential financial outcomes of successful whistleblower cases. Under federal law, individuals who provided evidence leading to successful prosecution of fraud against government health programs could receive between 15 and 30% of recovered funds as compensation for their cooperation. Given the scale of Medicare and Medicaid payments for the affected medications, a successful case could result in a settlement measured in hundreds of millions of dollars. The formal complaint to the Department of Justice had been filed in October 2021, initiating what Richardson warned would be a lengthy and complex investigation. Federal prosecutors had needed time to verify my evidence, conduct their own analysis of clinical trial data, and build cases against individual company executives who had participated in the fraud scheme. Throughout the investigation period, I had been required to maintain normal work responsibilities at Meridian while cooperating with federal investigators who conducted interviews and evidence review sessions during evenings and weekends. The psychological stress of maintaining professional relationships with colleagues who were potentially implicated in criminal fraud while participating in an investigation that could result in their prosecution had been considerable. The situation had been further complicated by my family's increasing concern about my social isolation and work-focused lifestyle. Sunday dinner conversations regularly featured suggestions about my need to prioritize relationships over career advancement, with Melissa frequently citing my apparent inability to maintain romantic relationships as evidence of misplaced priorities. These family gatherings had become exercises in careful omission, as I listened to advice about work-life balance from relatives who were unaware that my evening and weekend commitments involved cooperation with federal law enforcement rather than voluntary overtime. Melissa's engagement announcement had intensified the family focus on my single status, with regular commentary about my need to follow her example in pursuing social connections and romantic relationships. The engagement period had been particularly challenging, as wedding planning conversations dominated family interactions while I navigated the final phases of the federal investigation. Melissa's frequent updates about venue selections, guest list management, and vendor coordination had provided welcome distraction from the stress of ongoing criminal proceedings, though her regular complaints about my lack of enthusiasm for wedding-related activities had created additional family tension. The timing of the investigation's conclusion had created an unexpected convergence with Melissa's wedding weekend. Federal prosecutors had informed Richardson in early September that final settlement negotiations were proceeding successfully, with Meridian's board of directors prepared to accept responsibility for the fraud scheme and pay substantial penalties to avoid criminal prosecution of individual executives. The settlement amount had exceeded even Richardson's optimistic projections. Meridian would pay $450 million to resolve federal fraud charges, with additional penalties and compliance requirements designed to prevent future data manipulation. My whistleblower compensation, calculated at 20% of the recovery amount, would total $90 million before taxes. The final settlement approval had been scheduled for the Friday morning before Melissa's Saturday wedding, creating a surreal juxtaposition between my personal vindication and family celebration. Richardson had advised that wire transfer of settlement funds would occur within 72 hours of judicial approval, meaning that my financial transformation would be complete by Monday morning. As I had prepared for the wedding weekend, packing my modest wardrobe for what Melissa had repeatedly described as an elegant affair requiring appropriate attention to fashion and social presentation, I had reflected on the dramatic reversal that would soon unfold. The family narrative that positioned Melissa as the successful, socially accomplished sister while characterizing me as the antisocial workaholic would be permanently altered by the revelation that my boring, unglamorous work had generated more wealth than most people accumulated in multiple lifetimes. The irony extended beyond simple financial comparison. While Melissa had built her career on creating attractive narratives for social media consumption, emphasizing appearance and perception over substance, my work had been focused on protecting actual human lives through scientific integrity. The financial reward was secondary to the knowledge that my efforts had prevented dangerous medications from remaining in circulation, potentially saving thousands of patients from serious health complications. The wedding weekend had begun with the rehearsal dinner on Friday evening, where I had sat quietly at the family table listening to toasts celebrating Melissa and Marcus's successful careers and bright future while my phone periodically buzzed with text updates from Richardson regarding final settlement logistics. The contrast between the celebration of conventional social success around me and the private knowledge of my unprecedented professional achievement had created a dreamlike quality to the entire evening. Melissa's comments during the rehearsal. Dinner had been particularly pointed, including a toast where she expressed hope that her wedding weekend would inspire me to prioritize relationships and social connections over my tendency to disappear into work projects that nobody understood. The laughter from assembled family and friends had felt distant and artificial, as though I were observing the event through protective glass that muffled both sound and emotional impact. Saturday morning had brought Richardson's call confirming that Judge Morrison had signed the final settlement approval at 9:15 a.m., officially concluding 3 years of investigation and legal proceedings. The wire transfer would be processed Monday morning, transforming my net worth from modest savings accumulated through careful budgeting to a figure that placed me among the wealthiest individuals in Texas. As I had dressed for the wedding ceremony, selecting my most conservative outfit to meet Melissa's requirements for elegant presentation, I had considered whether to share the news with my family during the weekend celebration. Richardson had advised that settlement details would become public record within a few weeks, as federal fraud settlements typically generated significant media coverage due to their implications for pharmaceutical industry oversight. The decision to maintain silence through the wedding weekend had been based partly on respect for Melissa's desire to be the center of attention during her celebration, and partly on curiosity about how family dynamics would evolve once the financial transformation became public knowledge. The opportunity to observe their assessment of my life and choices from my current position of secret advantage provided valuable insight into assumptions and biases that had shaped family relationships for years. The ceremony itself had been elegant and flawlessly executed, with Melissa radiant in her designer gown and Marcus appropriately handsome and charming in his tailored tuxedo. The venue, a historic vineyard estate in Napa Valley, provided stunning visual backdrops that would translate perfectly into the social media content that Melissa had been planning throughout the engagement period. During the cocktail reception, between ceremony and dinner, I had maintained polite conversation with Marcus's friends and business associates, several of whom had been introduced to me with subtle suggestions about their availability and professional accomplishments. The networking attempts had been well-intentioned but based on fundamental misunderstanding of my actual circumstances and priorities. The dinner reception had proceeded through multiple courses and increasingly elaborate toasts, with family members and friends celebrating various aspects of Melissa and Marcus's relationship and future prospects. The speeches had consistently emphasized themes of social success, professional achievement, and the importance of building visible, socially connected lives. When Melissa had risen to deliver her maid of honor speech, positioning it as a thank you to family and friends who had supported her journey to this celebration, I had expected standard wedding sentiment about love, partnership, and future happiness. Instead, she had chosen to use the platform to deliver what amounted to public criticism of my lifestyle choices, disguised as sisterly concern but clearly intended to position herself as the successful sibling who had achieved everything I had apparently failed to accomplish. The speech had included specific details about my living situation, work schedule, and social isolation that felt inappropriate for a wedding celebration but generated appreciative laughter from guests who interpreted her comments as good-natured sibling teasing rather than calculated humiliation. Melissa's tone had carried enough warmth to maintain plausible deniability about her intentions while delivering pointed criticism about my apparent inability to achieve the kind of success she was celebrating. As she had spoken, describing my pathetic dedication to work that nobody understood while living alone in my tiny apartment, my phone had continued buzzing with notifications from Richardson's office regarding settlement logistics and media coordination for the public announcement scheduled for the following week. The contrast between Melissa's characterization of my circumstances and the reality of my situation had been so extreme that I had found myself genuinely curious about how she would react when that reality became public knowledge. The moment had crystallized years of family dynamics that had positioned conventional social success over substantive professional achievement, appearance over integrity, and visible accomplishment over meaningful contribution. Melissa's speech represented the culmination of assumptions and biases that had shaped our relationship since childhood, now delivered publicly as entertainment for her wedding guests. Standing in the back of the reception hall, listening to laughter ripple through the crowd as Melissa detailed my apparent failures and limitations, I had felt a strange sense of detachment from the entire scene. The knowledge that Monday morning would bring a financial transformation that would dwarf any success she had achieved created a buffer against the intended emotional impact of her words. More significantly, the 3 years I had spent risking My career and personal safety to protect patient welfare while building the largest pharmaceutical whistleblower case in history had provided perspective that made Melissa's definition of success seem narrow and ultimately insignificant. The work that she characterized as boring and pointless had generated not only unprecedented financial reward but also meaningful contribution to public health and safety that would benefit countless individuals. As the laughter subsided and Melissa continued her speech with more conventional wedding sentiment, I had remained perfectly still, my expression carefully neutral despite the congratulatory text messages continuing to arrive from Richardson's team. The real celebration would come later, privately, when I could fully appreciate the magnitude of what had been accomplished through patient, methodical work that prioritized substance over appearance. The evening was far from over, and Melissa's assessment of my life and choices would soon face a reality that would permanently alter family dynamics and social perceptions. But for now, I stood quietly in the back of the reception hall, surrounded by people who believed they understood my circumstances while being completely unaware of the transformation that was already in motion. The reception continued for another hour after Melissa's speech, with dancing and increasingly intoxicated conversations that provided cover for my quiet departure from the celebration. I had endured enough congratulations about my sister's beautiful wedding and well-meaning advice about finding similar happiness in my own life. The irony of receiving relationship guidance from people who measured success by social media presence and visible wealth had become unbearable, particularly knowing that within 72 hours my financial circumstances would render their concerns obsolete. I slipped away from the Vineyard estate around midnight, driving my modest Honda Civic through the winding Napa Valley roads toward my hotel while processing the evening's events. Melissa's public humiliation had been more calculated than I had anticipated, suggesting that her assessment of my circumstances wasn't simply misguided family concern but deliberate positioning to establish her superior status among the assembled guests. The speech had served multiple purposes, entertaining the audience, reinforcing her narrative about successful versus unsuccessful life choices, and ensuring that I understood my place in the family hierarchy she had constructed. The hotel room provided welcome solitude after hours of maintaining social composure while internally celebrating the completion of the most significant professional achievement of my career. I poured a glass of wine from the bottle I had purchased earlier and settled into the desk chair to review the messages that had accumulated throughout the evening. Richardson's team had sent detailed logistics regarding the settlement announcement, media coordination, and financial transfer procedures that would transform my circumstances beginning Monday morning. The timeline was carefully orchestrated to maximize public impact while protecting my privacy during the initial media attention. The Department of Justice would announce the settlement at a Tuesday morning press conference, highlighting the unprecedented scope of pharmaceutical fraud and the critical role of whistleblower cooperation in protecting patient safety. Richardson would provide prepared statements emphasizing my professional expertise and commitment to scientific integrity without revealing personal details that might compromise my security. Media outlets had already been briefed about the settlement's significance for pharmaceutical industry oversight, though my identity remained confidential until the official announcement. The story would likely generate substantial coverage due to the unprecedented settlement amount and implications for medication safety protocols. Richardson anticipated interview requests from major news networks, financial publications, and investigative journalism programs interested in exploring the broader context of pharmaceutical fraud prevention. My phone rang at 7:30 Sunday morning with a call from David Richardson, who was clearly working weekend hours to manage final settlement logistics. His voice carried the satisfaction of someone who had successfully navigated complex federal litigation to achieve exceptional outcomes for his client. "Emma, I hope you're managing the suspense well," he began with characteristic directness. "Everything proceeds exactly as scheduled. Wire transfer initiation occurs Monday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, with funds available in your account by Wednesday morning. The Justice Department confirms Tuesday's press conference at 11 a.m. with full settlement details and recognition of your cooperation." The confirmation provided relief after 3 years of uncertainty about investigative outcomes and potential legal complications. Richardson had warned repeatedly that federal fraud cases could collapse unexpectedly due to procedural challenges, prosecutorial priorities, or corporate legal strategies designed to minimize accountability. The successful conclusion represented validation not only of my decision to report the fraud but also of my methodical approach to building irrefutable evidence. Media strategy remains focused on professional credentials and public health implications, Richardson continued. "We emphasize your expertise in biostatistics and commitment to patient safety rather than personal details or financial compensation. Your background speaks for itself without sensationalizing the whistleblower narrative. This approach aligned with my preferences for maintaining privacy while ensuring that the story focused on substantive issues rather than individual circumstances. The pharmaceutical fraud represented systematic threats to patient welfare that extended far beyond my personal experience or financial benefit. Media coverage should prioritize those broader implications rather than creating celebrity narratives around whistleblower compensation. What about timeline for additional media requests? I asked, anticipating that successful completion of such a significant case would generate interest beyond initial news coverage. Expect substantial interest for approximately 6 weeks following the announcement, Richardson explained. Major business publications will want analytical pieces about pharmaceutical oversight. Medical journals may request commentary about clinical trial integrity. Financial media will focus on whistleblower compensation trends and regulatory compliance. Costs. We screen all requests and provide guidance about participation that serves your interests. The prospect of extended media attention created both opportunities and concerns. Professional recognition for expertise in pharmaceutical fraud detection could enhance career prospects in regulatory consulting or academic research. However, sustained public attention might complicate efforts to establish normal personal relationships or maintain privacy about financial circumstances. Sunday afternoon brought the final family obligation of the weekend, a farewell brunch at the Vineyard Estate where relatives and close friends gathered for casual conversation before departing Napa Valley. Melissa had planned the event as an elegant conclusion to her wedding celebration, providing additional opportunities for social media content while allowing her to receive continued congratulations about the beautiful ceremony and reception. I arrived at the brunch precisely on time, having spent the morning reviewing settlement documentation and preparing responses to anticipated family questions about my departure plans and work schedule. The casual format would likely encourage more personal conversation than the formal reception had permitted, creating potential for additional commentary about my lifestyle choices and apparent lack of social success. The gathering included approximately 40 people seated at outdoor tables overlooking the vineyard, with Melissa and Marcus positioned centrally to receive ongoing attention and well wishes. The atmosphere was relaxed and convivial, with conversation flowing easily among family members and friends who had bonded during the weekend celebration. I selected a seat at a table with my parents and 2 of Marcus's business associates, calculating that the mixed company would limit opportunities for extended family analysis of my personal circumstances. Dr. Richard Hartwell had spent Saturday evening discussing my work with various guests, explaining my role in pharmaceutical research with evident pride despite his concerns about my social isolation. Emma's expertise in medical statistics has always impressed us, my father commented to Robert Chen, one of Marcus's commercial real estate partners. Her graduate work at Rice University focused on clinical trial methodology, which seems increasingly important given recent controversies about medication safety. The observation carried more relevance than my father could have anticipated, though I maintained neutral expression while acknowledging his support. Robert responded with polite interest about pharmaceutical research, mentioning recent news coverage about FDA oversight challenges and drug approval controversies. Data integrity has become critical for patient safety, I offered, testing the conversation's direction without revealing specific knowledge. Recent cases have shown how statistical manipulation can hide serious side effects or exaggerate therapeutic benefits. Robert nodded thoughtfully, clearly aware of broader pharmaceutical industry concerns though unaware of my direct involvement in exposing systematic fraud. The financial stakes must create enormous pressure to present favorable results, regardless of actual effectiveness. The assessment was perceptive and aligned with patterns I had documented during my investigation. Meridian's fraud had been motivated precisely by such financial pressures, with quarterly revenue targets and investor expectations creating incentives to manipulate clinical trial data rather than acknowledge medication limitations or safety concerns. My mother, Patricia Hartwell, redirected the conversation toward more personal topics, expressing hope that my attendance at Melissa's wedding might inspire renewed attention to my own relationship prospects. The transition felt predictable, given her consistent concern about my single status and apparent social isolation. Several of Marcus's friends seemed quite interested in talking with you yesterday evening, she observed with subtle encouragement. That handsome attorney from his law firm was asking about your work and seemed genuinely impressed by your expertise. The reference was to Jonathan Mills, a corporate litigation specialist who had indeed engaged in extended conversation during the cocktail reception. His interest had seemed professional rather than romantic, focused on my analytical background and its applications in legal contexts rather than personal compatibility or social chemistry. Jonathan mentioned that pharmaceutical litigation requires sophisticated statistical analysis, I replied diplomatically. He was curious about methodologies for detecting data irregularities in clinical trials. The response was truthful while avoiding discussion of my specific experience with such litigation. Jonathan's questions had been surprisingly informed, suggesting familiarity with recent pharmaceutical fraud cases and recognition of their complexity. His professional interest in my expertise had been refreshing compared to other conversations that focused primarily on my perceived social deficiencies. Melissa approached our table during the main course, radiant in a flowing sundress that photographed beautifully against the vineyard backdrop. Her mood was celebratory and expansive, clearly energized by the successful conclusion of her wedding weekend and continued attention from family and friends. "Emma, I hope you enjoyed meeting everyone yesterday," she said with apparent sincerity, though her tone carried subtle condescension. "I know social events aren't usually your preference, but it's important to expand your network beyond work colleagues." The comment reflected her persistent misunderstanding of my circumstances, while reinforcing her narrative about my social limitations. Her assumption that networking opportunities represented my primary benefit from attending her wedding demonstrated remarkable self-absorption, even by her standards. "The celebration was beautiful," I replied evenly. "You and Marcus created a wonderful weekend for everyone." Melissa beamed at the compliment, clearly satisfied with the recognition of her event planning capabilities. "We wanted something elegant but approachable, sophisticated but not pretentious." The vendor coordination was incredibly complex, but the results speak for themselves. The description aligned with her professional expertise in marketing and brand management, skills that had served her well in creating visually impressive events that generated substantial social media engagement. Her ability to orchestrate beautiful experiences was genuine and admirable, even when accompanied by less attractive personal characteristics. Marcus joined our conversation, expressing appreciation for my attendance and contribution to their special weekend. His demeanor was genuinely warm and inclusive, suggesting that Melissa's assessment of my social limitations didn't reflect his personal observations or preferences. "Your conversation with Jonathan Mills was quite animated," Marcus noted with friendly interest. "He mentioned being impressed by your analytical background and its applications in legal contexts. He's always looking for expert consultants with sophisticated statistical expertise." The observation surprised me, as I hadn't anticipated that my professional conversation would generate commentary or potential referral opportunities. Jonathan's interest in my methodological background suggested possible consulting prospects that could complement my primary career trajectory. "Statistical analysis has broad applications across industries," I acknowledged. "Legal contexts often require similar pattern recognition and data integrity assessment as pharmaceutical research." Marcus nodded enthusiastically, clearly pleased to facilitate potential professional connections among his social network. Jonathan's firm handles complex corporate litigation that frequently involves technical analysis. "Your background seems perfectly suited for that type of consulting work." The suggestion had merit, particularly given my upcoming circumstances that would provide financial flexibility to pursue selective consulting opportunities rather than conventional full-time employment. Regulatory compliance consulting could offer intellectually engaging work while providing schedule flexibility and professional autonomy. Our conversation was interrupted by Patricia Mills, Marcus's mother, who approached with her husband to express final appreciation for the wonderful weekend celebration. The exchange provided natural conclusion to family interactions as various guests began preparing for departure. I said goodbye to my parents, who were returning to Houston that afternoon, with promises to visit during Thanksgiving holidays and maintain better communication about my work and personal circumstances. My father's parting comment about being proud of my professional achievements carried unexpected emotional weight, suggesting that his support transcended their concerns about my social isolation. The drive back to Austin provided 4 hours of solitude to process the weekend's events and prepare for the transformation that would begin Monday morning. The highway stretched through central Texas landscape that felt familiar and comforting. After the orchestrated elegance of Napa Valley, my modest apartment would provide welcome refuge after days of maintaining social composure while privately celebrating unprecedented professional success. Monday morning arrived with Richardson's call confirming that wire transfer procedures had been initiated successfully. The Department of Justice had finalized press release materials highlighting the settlement's significance for pharmaceutical industry oversight and patient safety protection. Media coordination was proceeding according to schedule, with major News outlets prepared to cover the story as soon as official announcements were released. $90 million should appear in your account by Wednesday afternoon, Richardson confirmed with evident satisfaction. This represents the largest individual whistleblower compensation in pharmaceutical fraud history. Your cooperation was instrumental in exposing systematic threats to patient safety and recovering substantial funds for federal health programs. The confirmation created surreal anticipation as I prepared for another routine day at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, where my colleagues remained unaware that their company had agreed to pay unprecedented penalties for criminal fraud I had documented. The normal workspace interactions would feel strange knowing that federal prosecutors had built their case using evidence I had provided during 3 years of careful investigation. My resignation letter had been prepared weeks earlier, though. Richardson advised waiting until settlement funds were confirmed before submitting formal notice. The timing would allow clean transition from Meridian without creating suspicion about my role in the federal investigation. My departure could be characterized as personal career transition rather than consequences of whistleblower activities. Tuesday morning brought the Justice Department press conference that Richardson had described as carefully orchestrated to maximize public impact while protecting my privacy. I watched the live stream from my office at Meridian, maintaining normal work responsibilities while federal officials announced that my former employer had agreed to pay $450 million to resolve criminal fraud charges. Attorney General Patricia Sullivan delivered prepared remarks emphasizing the unprecedented scope of pharmaceutical fraud and critical importance of whistleblower cooperation in protecting patient safety. Her presentation highlighted systematic manipulation of clinical trial data that had hidden serious side effects while exaggerating therapeutic benefits for medications used by hundreds of thousands of patients. This settlement represents the largest pharmaceutical fraud recovery in Justice Department history, Sullivan announced to assembled media representatives. Meridian Pharmaceuticals systematically manipulated clinical trial data for multiple medications, potentially endangering patient safety while defrauding federal health programs of hundreds of millions of dollars. The Attorney General's remarks emphasized broader implications for pharmaceutical industry oversight rather than focusing on individual compensation or personal circumstances. The approach aligned with Richardson's media strategy while ensuring that public attention remained focused on substantive policy issues rather than sensational narratives about whistleblower rewards. We recognize the extraordinary courage and professional expertise of the individual whose cooperation made this investigation possible, Sullivan continued. Pharmaceutical fraud represents complex criminal activity that requires specialized knowledge to detect and document. Patient safety depends on individuals with scientific expertise being willing to report evidence of data manipulation despite potential personal and professional risks. The acknowledgement felt professionally validating while maintaining appropriate privacy about personal details. Media coverage would focus on systematic fraud patterns and regulatory implications rather than creating celebrity narratives around my circumstances or financial compensation. Richardson's office released supplementary materials providing technical details about the fraud scheme without identifying specific individuals or revealing investigative methodologies that might compromise future cases. The documentation emphasized sophisticated data manipulation techniques that required specialized statistical training to recognize and prove conclusively. My colleagues at Meridian received the news with visible shock and confusion, gathered around computer screens displaying news coverage that described their employer as criminally fraudulent organization that had systematically endangered patient safety for financial gain. The cognitive dissonance was evident as they attempted to reconcile their daily work experience with federal characterizations of systematic criminal activity. Dr. Amanda Foster, who had attempted to silence my concerns through the promotion offer years earlier, appeared particularly shaken by media coverage that specifically mentioned manipulation of respiratory medication clinical trials. Her involvement in the fraud scheme was clearly significant, though federal prosecutors had apparently negotiated cooperation agreements that avoided individual criminal charges. I maintained normal work responsibilities throughout the day, participating in routine meetings and completing standard analytical tasks while internally preparing for the dramatic transition that would soon become public knowledge. The surreal quality of continuing normal employment at a company that had just admitted criminal fraud created psychological distance from workplace interactions and professional relationships. Wednesday afternoon brought Richardson's call confirming that settlement funds had been successfully transferred to my designated accounts. $90 million had transformed my net worth from modest middle-class savings to wealth that placed me among the most financially successful individuals in Texas. The mathematical reality was staggering, though the emotional impact remained surprisingly muted given the 3-year build-up to this moment. Your financial circumstances are now fundamentally different, Richardson observed with characteristic understatement. This level of wealth requires sophisticated management strategies. For tax optimization, investment allocation, and privacy protection. I recommend immediate consultation with specialists in high net worth financial planning. The practical implications were overwhelming despite years of anticipation. Investment decisions, tax strategies, and lifestyle adjustments would require careful consideration to avoid common mistakes that accompanied sudden wealth acquisition. Richardson provided referrals to financial advisors who specialized in managing whistleblower compensation and understood the unique circumstances surrounding such dramatic income changes. My resignation letter was submitted to Meridian's Human Resources Department that afternoon, citing personal career transition and expressing appreciation for professional development opportunities the position had provided. The timing aligned with post-settlement departure plans while avoiding any suggestion of connection between my resignation and recent federal announcements about the company's criminal fraud. The following week brought the first wave of media attention that Richardson had anticipated. Major news outlets requested interviews about pharmaceutical fraud detection methodologies and whistleblower protection policies. Financial publications wanted commentary about regulatory compliance costs and industry oversight mechanisms. Medical journals sought analysis about clinical trial integrity and patient safety implications. Richardson screened all requests according to our predetermined media strategy, accepting interviews that focused on professional expertise and substantive policy issues while declining opportunities that emphasized personal circumstances or financial compensation. The approach maintained privacy while establishing professional credibility in pharmaceutical regulatory consulting. My first major interview was scheduled with Sarah Henderson from the Wall Street Journal, who had covered pharmaceutical industry regulation extensively and understood the technical complexities involved in detecting clinical trial fraud. Her questions focused on methodological issues rather than personal narrative, creating comfortable discussion about statistical analysis and data integrity assessment. How does someone with your background recognize data manipulation that might escape routine regulatory review? Henderson asked during our phone interview. Statistical patterns that appear consistently across multiple trials suggest systematic rather than random variations, I explained, drawing on my documented experience without revealing specific details about Meridian's fraud. Training in biostatistics provides tools for identifying anomalies that indicate deliberate modification rather than natural variation in patient response. The technical discussion allowed me to demonstrate expertise while educating readers about complex issues surrounding pharmaceutical oversight. Henderson's questions were sophisticated and well-informed, suggesting that her coverage would focus on substantive policy implications rather than sensational whistleblower narratives. What systemic changes would most effectively prevent similar fraud in the future? She continued, seeking analysis about regulatory reform rather than personal circumstances. Independent statistical review of clinical trial data before FDA submission would create additional verification layer, I suggested, offering practical recommendations based on my investigative experience. Current protocols rely heavily on company self-reporting, which creates obvious conflicts of interest when financial stakes are substantial. The interview established credibility as a subject matter expert while avoiding discussion of personal financial outcomes or private circumstances. Henderson's coverage would likely influence policy discussions about pharmaceutical oversight without creating unwanted attention to my individual situation. That evening, as I sat in my modest apartment, that would soon be replaced by more substantial accommodations, I reflected on the week's dramatic transformation. The family narrative that had positioned Melissa as the successful sister while characterizing me as the antisocial workaholic had been permanently altered by events that none of them could have anticipated. Melissa's wedding speech about my pathetic circumstances would acquire different meaning when the settlement became public knowledge. Her assessment of my boring work and social isolation would be recontextualized by understanding that my professional activities had generated more wealth than most people accumulated in multiple lifetimes while simultaneously protecting thousands of patients from dangerous medications. The irony extended beyond simple financial comparison. While Melissa had built her career creating attractive narratives for social media consumption, emphasizing appearance and perception over substance, my work had focused on scientific integrity and patient safety. The settlement represented validation of priorities that family members had consistently questioned or dismissed. More significantly, the 3 years of investigation and legal proceedings had provided perspective that made conventional measures of success seem narrow and ultimately superficial. The knowledge that my efforts had prevented dangerous medications from remaining in circulation created satisfaction that transcended financial compensation or professional recognition. My phone rang with a call from Jonathan Mills, the attorney I had met at Melissa's wedding who had expressed interest in my analytical expertise. His timing suggested he had connected my background with recent media coverage about pharmaceutical fraud settlements, though his approach remained professionally appropriate. "Emma, I hope you don't mind my calling directly," he began with courteous formality. "Our conversation at Marcus's wedding was quite thought-provoking, and recent news coverage about pharmaceutical fraud has reinforced my sense that your expertise could be valuable for complex litigation matters." The professional inquiry provided welcome distraction from contemplating personal implications of my transformed circumstances. Corporate litigation consulting could offer intellectually engaging work while providing schedule flexibility that would allow pursuit of other interests. "I'd be interested in discussing potential collaboration," I replied, appreciating his direct approach and professional focus. "My schedule has become more flexible recently, which would allow selective consulting engagement." Jonathan suggested meeting the following week to discuss specific case types where statistical analysis might provide critical insights for litigation strategy. His firm handled corporate disputes that frequently involved technical evidence requiring specialized interpretation and expert testimony. The conversation concluded with arrangements for a professional lunch meeting where we could explore potential consulting relationships without the social complications of family event interactions. His interest in my expertise rather than personal circumstances created optimistic prospects for meaningful professional engagement. As Wednesday evening concluded, I began preparing for the fundamental lifestyle adjustments that unprecedented wealth would require. The settlement had created financial freedom that most people could never imagine, though it also brought responsibilities and decisions that would shape my future in ways I was only beginning to understand. The transformation that would soon become public knowledge represented validation of choices that had consistently prioritized substance over appearance, scientific integrity over personal advancement, and patient welfare over financial security. The family assumptions that had shaped relationships for years would require fundamental revision as the reality of my circumstances became known. Thursday morning brought Richardson's call with updates about media coverage and settlement logistics that would conclude our formal attorney-client relationship. His voice carried satisfaction about successful case resolution and recognition of my cooperation throughout the challenging 3-year process. "Media response has been exceptionally positive," he reported with evident pleasure. "Coverage emphasizes the importance of scientific expertise in detecting pharmaceutical fraud and protecting patient safety. Your professional background provides credibility that strengthens public understanding of these complex issues." The assessment aligned with my preferences for maintaining focus on substantive policy implications rather than personal circumstances or financial outcomes. Richardson's media strategy had successfully established professional credibility while preserving privacy about individual details that were irrelevant to broader public interests. "Settlement documentation is now complete," he continued. "All funds have been successfully transferred, and your cooperation obligations to federal prosecutors have concluded. You're free to make independent decisions about future media participation or professional activities related to pharmaceutical oversight." The confirmation provided closure to 3 years of legal uncertainty while creating complete autonomy about future professional directions. Consulting opportunities in regulatory compliance or academic research could build on expertise developed during the investigation while contributing to systematic improvements in pharmaceutical safety oversight. Friday afternoon brought my final day at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, concluding employment that had unexpectedly led to the most significant professional achievement of my career. Colleagues remained largely unaware of my role in exposing the criminal fraud that had resulted in unprecedented federal penalties and systematic changes to company operations. My office cleaning was completed quietly, with personal items packed efficiently while maintaining normal workplace interactions. The departure felt anticlimactic given the magnitude of events that had transpired, though anonymity provided protection from potential workplace hostility or unwanted attention. Dr. Foster appeared in my office doorway as I completed final administrative tasks, her expression carefully neutral despite obvious awareness that my departure timing coincided suspiciously with recent federal settlements. Her attempt at casual conversation felt strained and artificial. "We'll miss your analytical expertise," she offered with forced warmth. "Your attention to statistical detail was always quite remarkable." The comment carried layers of meaning that neither of us could acknowledge directly. Her recognition of my analytical capabilities was genuine, though she clearly understood that those same capabilities had ultimately exposed systematic fraud that threatened the company's existence. The experience here has been quite educational, I replied. Diplomatically, maintaining professional courtesy while avoiding any suggestion of satisfaction about recent developments. Foster nodded thoughtfully, perhaps recognizing that educational value had extended far beyond routine pharmaceutical research to include comprehensive understanding of corporate fraud detection and federal whistleblower procedures. My departure from Meridian concluded without fanfare or recognition, though the absence of attention suited my preferences perfectly. The 3 years of investigation had required extreme discretion and careful management of workplace relationships while building criminal cases against company executives. Quiet departure provided appropriate conclusion to that challenging period. Weekend planning focused on practical adjustments that unprecedented wealth would require: residential transition from my modest apartment to appropriate accommodations, vehicle replacement from my aging Honda Civic to reliable transportation suitable for my changed circumstances, and financial management consultation to optimize investment strategies and tax planning. The luxury of unlimited financial resources created unfamiliar decision-making challenges. Housing options could include anything from downtown Austin condominiums to hill country estates, though my preferences remained modest despite transformed buying power. Transportation needs were similarly flexible, though ostentatious displays of wealth seemed inappropriate given my preference for privacy and professional discretion. Sunday evening brought contemplation of the dramatic reversal that would soon become known to family members who had consistently questioned my life choices and professional priorities. Melissa's wedding speech about my pathetic circumstances would acquire ironic significance when settlement details became public knowledge. The transformation represented more than financial compensation for professional risks undertaken during federal investigation. It validated fundamental values about scientific integrity, patient advocacy, and meaningful contribution that had guided career decisions despite family pressure to prioritize conventional social success. Most significantly, the settlement provided independence to pursue professional activities based purely on intellectual interest and social value rather than financial necessity. Consulting opportunities in pharmaceutical oversight, academic research collaboration, or policy advocacy could contribute to systematic improvements in medication safety without requiring consideration of salary or benefit requirements. As Monday morning approached, marking 1 week since settlement confirmation and the beginning of public recognition of my circumstances, I prepared for conversations with family members who would need to reconcile their assumptions about my failures with evidence of unprecedented success achieved through the very qualities they had consistently criticized. The week ahead would bring necessary adjustments to lifestyle, professional relationships, and family dynamics that reflected fundamental changes in my circumstances and priorities. The boring, antisocial work that Melissa had ridiculed publicly had generated wealth and recognition that would permanently alter how my choices and achievements were perceived and valued. The call from my mother came at 7:30 on Tuesday morning, exactly 10 minutes after the major news networks had begun broadcasting details about the Meridian Pharmaceutical settlement. Her voice carried confusion and disbelief that I had anticipated but was still unprepared to navigate gracefully. "Emma, darling, there's a news story about some pharmaceutical whistleblower receiving $90 million. And they're showing your photograph," she began, her academic training evident in her careful word choice despite obvious emotional turmoil. "The reporter mentioned your name and your work at Meridian. I must be misunderstanding something fundamental about the situation." The moment had arrived sooner than Richardson's timeline had suggested, though media attention had accelerated once settlement details became public record. My photograph had been obtained from Meridian's corporate website and Rice University archives, creating visual confirmation that connected my identity to the unprecedented whistleblower compensation. "The news reports are accurate," I confirmed, finding unexpected calm in finally acknowledging the truth that had shaped my life for 3 years. "I discovered systematic fraud in clinical trial data and reported it to federal authorities. The settlement was finalized last week." Silence stretched across the phone connection as my mother processed information that fundamentally contradicted every assumption she had maintained about my circumstances and professional achievements. Her worldview required significant adjustment to accommodate the reality that her supposedly unsuccessful daughter had generated more wealth than most university professors earned in multiple lifetimes. $90 million, she repeated slowly, as though testing the words for accuracy. "You've been working with federal investigators for years while we worried about your social isolation and career advancement. Emma, why didn't you tell us what was happening?" The question reflected natural parental concern, though the answer involved legal complexities and personal priorities that would be difficult to explain satisfactorily. Federal investigations required absolute confidentiality. to protect both witnesses and ongoing prosecutions. Additionally, my family's consistent dismissal of my professional choices had created emotional distance that made sharing such significant personal information seem inappropriate. Whistleblower cases require complete secrecy during investigation. I explained, offering the procedural justification while avoiding discussion of family dynamics that had influenced my decision to maintain silence. Any disclosure could have compromised federal prosecution efforts and endangered patient safety. My mother accepted this explanation with the intellectual understanding of someone accustomed to academic research protocols, though her emotional reaction remained evident. Your father will be absolutely astounded. We've been so concerned about your apparent lack of professional recognition and social connections. This changes everything we thought we understood about your life and choices. The conversation continued for 20 minutes as my mother sought additional details about the investigation timeline, settlement procedures, and media coverage expectations. Her academic curiosity about the legal processes involved provided neutral ground for discussion while we both adjusted to fundamentally altered family dynamics. My father called 30 minutes later with characteristic directness about the professional implications of my circumstances. His voice carried unmistakable pride alongside concern about public attention and its potential impact on my privacy and security. Emma, this is extraordinary professional achievement that validates everything we've admired about your analytical capabilities and ethical commitment, he began with typical academic formality. However, this level of wealth and media attention creates challenges that require careful consideration and strategic management. His practical concerns were well-founded. Sudden wealth attracted various forms of unwanted attention, from investment solicitations to personal security risks that required professional assessment and mitigation strategies. Richardson had provided preliminary guidance about wealth management and privacy protection, though comprehensive planning would require specialized consultation. I've engaged financial advisors who specialize in whistleblower compensation, I assured him, appreciating his pragmatic approach to unprecedented circumstances. The settlement creates opportunities for meaningful philanthropy and continued contribution to pharmaceutical safety oversight. My father's response reflected genuine satisfaction about potential applications of my resources toward causes that aligned with our family's academic values and commitment to public service. His pride in my achievement was evident despite years of concern about my apparent social and professional limitations. The call from Melissa came at noon, after she had undoubtedly spent hours processing news coverage and calculating implications for family relationships and social dynamics. Her tone was carefully controlled, though underlying shock and embarrassment were clearly evident. Emma, I've been seeing your name and photograph in news coverage about some pharmaceutical settlement, she began with artificial casualness that fooled neither of us. I had no idea you were involved in anything so significant. Congratulations on your professional success. The forced congratulations felt hollow given her public humiliation of my circumstances just 1 week earlier. Her wedding speech about my pathetic lifestyle and professional failures had been delivered to 300 guests who were now presumably aware that her assessment had been spectacularly inaccurate. Thank you, I replied simply, offering no elaboration that might ease her obvious discomfort with the situation. Her request for this conversation suggested awareness that her previous behavior required acknowledgement and possibly apology. I feel terrible about my comments during the wedding reception, she continued, her voice gaining sincerity as she addressed the elephant in our conversation. I had no idea about your professional situation or the important work you were doing. My speech was inappropriate and hurtful, and I'm genuinely sorry for those remarks. The apology was necessary and appreciated, though it reflected embarrassment about public perception rather than genuine understanding of how her behavior had affected our relationship. Her concern centered on how her wedding guests would now interpret her characterization of my circumstances rather than recognition of underlying family dynamics that had enabled such public humiliation. Your comments reflected assumptions that our family has maintained for years, I observed, choosing directness over diplomacy. The settlement doesn't change the fundamental differences in how we approach professional success and personal priorities. Melissa's silence suggested she was unprepared for analysis that extended beyond simple apology and reconciliation. Her expectation seemed to be that financial vindication would restore normal family relationships without addressing deeper issues about respect, understanding, and support that had shaped our interactions for years. I suppose I never understood the nature of your work or its potential significance, she admitted with reluctant honesty. Your dedication to data analysis and research seemed so removed from practical applications. I didn't recognize that you were protecting patient safety and exposing criminal fraud. Her acknowledgement represented genuine learning, though it also revealed how thoroughly she had dismissed my professional expertise without attempting to understand its value or applications. The pattern reflected broader family dynamics where conventional social success was prioritized over substantive contribution or specialized knowledge. Our conversation concluded with tentative plans for a private dinner where we could discuss family relationships without the pressure of public attention or social media considerations. Melissa's request for privacy suggested awareness that her previous public characterization of my circumstances would require careful management as news coverage continued. The afternoon brought calls from Marcus and several wedding guests who had witnessed Melissa's speech and were now reconciling her assessment with media coverage about my unprecedented professional achievement. Their reactions ranged from apologetic embarrassment to genuine curiosity about pharmaceutical fraud detection and whistleblower procedures. Jonathan Mills called with professional congratulations and renewed interest in consulting collaboration, noting that recent media coverage had reinforced his assessment of my analytical capabilities and their potential applications in complex litigation. His enthusiasm about working together had clearly increased given public validation of my expertise. Your background in detecting sophisticated fraud schemes could be invaluable for corporate litigation involving financial irregularities or regulatory compliance, he explained during our extended conversation. Recent media coverage demonstrates precisely the kind of pattern recognition and technical analysis that our most challenging cases require. The professional opportunity provided welcome focus on future applications of my expertise rather than continued analysis of family dynamics and personal vindication. Corporate consulting could offer intellectually engaging work while contributing to broader efforts to detect and prevent fraudulent business practices. Evening news coverage included extended segments about pharmaceutical fraud prevention and the role of industry insiders in protecting patient safety. My photograph appeared alongside discussions of clinical trial integrity and federal oversight mechanisms, establishing public recognition as a subject matter expert in pharmaceutical regulatory compliance. The coverage emphasized professional credentials and substantive policy implications rather than personal circumstances or financial compensation, aligning with Richardson's media strategy and my preferences for privacy. The approach helped establish credibility for potential consulting work while avoiding sensational narratives about whistleblower rewards. Wednesday morning brought the first wave of interview requests from national media outlets seeking commentary about pharmaceutical oversight and fraud detection methodologies. Richardson's screening process accepted opportunities that focused on technical expertise while declining requests that emphasized personal narrative or financial outcomes. My interview with CNN's health correspondent allowed detailed discussion of clinical trial data integrity and statistical methods for detecting manipulation. The technical focus educated viewers about complex regulatory issues while establishing professional authority on pharmaceutical safety oversight. What should patients understand about clinical trial data and medication safety? The correspondent asked, seeking practical guidance for audience members concerned about pharmaceutical fraud implications. Patients should ask their physicians about the scope and duration of clinical trials supporting medication recommendations, I suggested, offering actionable advice based on my investigative experience. Independent research about medication side effects and alternative treatments provides additional information beyond pharmaceutical company marketing. The educational approach provided valuable public service while demonstrating expertise that would attract consulting opportunities from organizations committed to patient advocacy and regulatory compliance. Media appearances were becoming platforms for contributing to public understanding rather than simply promoting personal achievements. Thursday brought lunch with Jonathan Mills at an elegant downtown restaurant where we could discuss consulting collaboration without interruption or unwanted attention. His preliminary case description suggested fascinating applications for statistical analysis in detecting corporate financial irregularities and proving fraudulent business practices. We're representing investors in a securities fraud case involving manipulated earnings reports, he explained over our appetizers. The defendant company used sophisticated accounting techniques to inflate revenue and hide losses over multiple quarters. Your pattern recognition skills could help identify specific instances of data manipulation that support our damage calculations. The case description sounded remarkably similar to methodologies I had observed during my pharmaceutical investigation, though applied to financial reporting rather than clinical trial data. Statistical analysis could reveal inconsistencies that suggested deliberate manipulation rather than natural business fluctuations. Financial fraud often follows predictable patterns that become evident through careful data analysis, I observed, drawing on my documented experience without revealing specific investigative details. Training in biostatistics provides transferable skills for identifying anomalies across various data types and business contexts. Jonathan's enthusiasm about potential collaboration was evident as he described additional cases where specialized analytical expertise could provide crucial litigation support. His firm's sophisticated clientele and complex case types offered opportunities for intellectually challenging work that would complement my pharmaceutical oversight experience. Our discussion extended through lunch as we explored consulting arrangements that would provide schedule flexibility while allowing pursuit of other professional interests. Jonathan's approach was refreshingly professional, focused on expertise and work quality rather than celebrity status or media attention resulting from recent settlement publicity. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected call from Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Dean of the School of Public Health at the University of Texas, who had been following media coverage about my pharmaceutical fraud investigation and wanted to discuss potential academic collaboration. Your expertise in clinical trial data integrity represents exactly the kind of practical knowledge our students need to understand, she explained with evident enthusiasm. We've been developing curriculum about pharmaceutical regulatory compliance and would welcome your contribution as guest lecturer or adjunct faculty member. The academic opportunity appealed to my educational background and commitment to training future public health professionals about industry oversight challenges. Teaching about fraud detection methodologies could help prepare students to recognize and report similar patterns during their own careers. I'd be interested in developing curriculum that combines statistical methodology with ethical decision-making frameworks, I replied, envisioning courses that would prepare students for complex professional situations where technical expertise intersected with moral obligations. Dr. Mitchell's excitement about potential collaboration was infectious as she described existing public health programs and opportunities for expanding pharmaceutical oversight education. Academic engagement could provide meaningful contribution to professional development while maintaining intellectual stimulation and social purpose. Weekend planning focused on residential transition from my modest apartment to accommodations appropriate for my transformed circumstances. Housing options ranged from downtown luxury condominiums to hill country estates, though my preferences remained relatively conservative despite unlimited financial resources. I selected a mid-century modern home in the Tarrytown neighborhood that offered privacy and elegance without ostentatious displays of wealth. The property featured clean architectural lines, mature landscaping, and proximity to downtown Austin that would facilitate professional activities while providing peaceful residential environment. The house purchase process moved rapidly when financing considerations became irrelevant due to my settlement resources. Cash offers eliminated traditional mortgage procedures while providing negotiating advantages that simplified closing logistics and timeline management. Sunday evening brought reflection on the dramatic transformation that had occurred since Melissa's wedding reception just 2 weeks earlier. Her public characterization of my pathetic circumstances had been replaced by media recognition as a pharmaceutical fraud expert whose professional achievement represented unprecedented individual success in protecting patient safety. The financial compensation was substantial beyond any reasonable expectation, though the professional validation and contribution to public health provided more lasting satisfaction than wealth accumulation. 3 years of investigation and legal proceedings had demonstrated that principled commitment to scientific integrity could generate meaningful impact while creating personal security and independence. Monday morning marked my first day of complete professional autonomy, free from employment obligations and able to pursue consulting opportunities, academic collaboration, and personal interests according to my own priorities and schedule. The luxury of unlimited time and financial resources created possibilities that most people could never imagine. My new home office was designed to accommodate consulting work and academic research, with sophisticated technology systems and reference libraries that would support complex analytical projects. The space reflected my professional identity while providing comfortable environment for the intellectual work that had always been my primary source of satisfaction and purpose. The consulting arrangement with Jonathan's firm was formalized with retainer agreements that provided steady income stream while allowing flexibility for other professional commitments. Academic collaboration with UT's School of Public Health would begin with curriculum development for fall semester courses about pharmaceutical regulatory compliance. Tuesday brought lunch with Melissa at a quiet restaurant where we could discuss family relationships without media attention or social pressure. Her demeanor was subdued and thoughtful, suggesting genuine reflection about previous assumptions and behavior patterns. I've been thinking about our conversation last week and the fundamental differences in how we approach success and recognition, she began with uncharacteristic introspection. I realize that my focus on social media presence and visible achievement made me dismiss the value of your work and its potential impact. Her acknowledgement represented significant personal growth, though it also revealed how thoroughly she had misunderstood my professional priorities and their alignment with our family's academic values. The pharmaceutical investigation had combined technical expertise with ethical commitment in ways that should have earned respect rather than dismissal. Your settlement represents more than financial compensation, she continued, demonstrating deeper understanding than I had anticipated. You've contributed to patient safety and held corporations accountable for criminal behavior. That's meaningful achievement that transcends any conventional measure of professional success. The recognition was gratifying and suggested potential for improved relationship dynamics based on mutual respect rather than competitive comparison. Melissa's ability to acknowledge her previous errors and demonstrate learning created optimistic prospects for future family interactions. Our conversation extended through the afternoon as we explored family dynamics that had shaped our relationship and opportunities for establishing more supportive connections going forward. Melissa's willingness to examine her own behavior and assumptions provided foundation for genuine reconciliation rather than superficial apology. Wednesday evening brought a family dinner at my parents' home where we could celebrate my professional achievement privately while discussing implications for future family relationships and dynamics. The gathering felt different from previous interactions, marked by genuine respect and curiosity rather than concern and criticism. My father's pride in my accomplishment was evident as he asked detailed questions about investigation methodologies and federal prosecution procedures. His academic fascination with legal processes provided neutral ground for discussion while demonstrating appreciation for the intellectual challenges involved in building complex fraud cases. My mother's relief about my financial security was palpable, though she also expressed belated understanding about the professional isolation and stress I had endured during 3 years of confidential investigation. Her recognition of personal sacrifices involved in whistleblower activities provided emotional validation that had been missing during the challenging investigation period. The evening concluded with tentative planning for Thanksgiving celebration that would acknowledge my changed circumstances while maintaining family traditions and connections. The prospect of holiday gatherings without underlying tension about my apparent failures created optimistic anticipation for improved family relationships. Thursday morning brought confirmation that my story had inspired other pharmaceutical industry professionals to report suspicious activities to federal authorities. Richardson's office had received inquiries from several potential whistleblowers who were encouraged by successful prosecution outcomes and substantial compensation awards. The ripple effects of my case extended beyond immediate financial recovery to systematic improvements in industry oversight and compliance monitoring. Media coverage had educated healthcare professionals about fraud detection methodologies while demonstrating that federal protection and compensation programs provided viable alternatives to remaining silent about corporate misconduct. My settlement had established precedent that would influence future whistleblower cases and encourage industry professionals to prioritize patient safety over employment security. The broader impact represented the most meaningful aspect of my experience, transcending personal vindication to create systematic change that would benefit countless patients and healthcare consumers. As I settled into my new home and established routines that reflected my transformed circumstances, I contemplated the journey from Melissa's wedding humiliation to public recognition as a pharmaceutical fraud expert whose work had generated unprecedented professional and financial success. The contrast was dramatic, though the underlying values and priorities that had guided my choices remained consistent. Scientific integrity, patient advocacy, and meaningful contribution had motivated my professional decisions despite family pressure to prioritize conventional social success and visible achievement. The settlement had validated those choices while creating independence to pursue future activities based purely on intellectual interest and social value rather than financial necessity. Consulting opportunities, academic collaboration, and philanthropic activities could contribute to systematic improvements in pharmaceutical oversight without requiring consideration of salary or benefit requirements. Most significantly, the experience had demonstrated that principled commitment to professional ethics could generate impact and recognition that transcended conventional measures of success. The boring, antisocial work that Melissa had ridiculed publicly had protected patient safety while creating wealth and influence that would support continued contribution to public health and regulatory compliance. The transformation from wedding humiliation to federal recognition represented more than personal vindication. It validated fundamental values about integrity, expertise, and meaningful contribution that would guide future decisions about how to apply unprecedented resources and recognition toward causes that aligned with my deepest professional and personal commitments. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.